it has been a while since I have filmed a video, especially one just sitting in my room. I'm starting to feel a little more inspired and motivated to film videos and maybe share some new content. And I really want to start with reviewing all of the books I read in 2023. So this video may be a little bit late into starting the new year, but I know a lot of us are still putting together lists of books that we want to read this year and maybe even increasing our reading goal from last year. So my goal last year was to read 25 books, and I did exceed that, and I hit 31, I believe, which I know in comparison to a lot of booktubers or booktalkers is like a third of what they read, but let's face it, most of us are not going to have time to read 150 books a year. But I did read a lot of really good books in 2023. I read a couple I didn't like so much, and I'd like to share with you guys the highlights, maybe the ones that I wouldn't recommend, the ones I would recommend, and just what I thought overall. So I will go in order as how I read them throughout the year, and I do have a scale on how I rated them between did not finish to 5 stars. So the DNF, did not finish, that means I got through most of the book, but I didn't finish at all. I didn't complete it, or I just skimmed the ending and that's it. 1 to 2 stars means that I literally had to push myself through it, which that didn't happen this year. 2 to 2.5 stars, I would say I didn't really like it. I finished it, but I probably would never read it again. 3 to 3.5 stars are books that I enjoyed. I had a good time reading. They weren't like groundbreaking works, but I didn't like them, and I probably would read them again. 4 to 4.5 stars are books that are really close to being perfect, and I definitely would read them again. I would recommend them. And then 5 stars is like the book of the year, had to have a long-lasting impact. I had to be telling everybody about it. Highly recommended kind of book. So let's just get started with the very first book I read in 2023. The 2023 books did not get off to a good start because I didn't finish this book. This is the only book in 2023 I didn't finish, which was It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. I will start with a short summary, avoiding spoilers for all these books, and then what I did and didn't like about it. An LA socialite is sent away to her hometown, which is a small fisherman's village in Washington. So she must learn how to become self-sufficient before she's allowed to move back to LA. And although she wants to get out of Westport as soon as possible, she finds herself getting deeper into her roots and eventually falling for a local fisherman. So I really did like the main character, Piper. I thought she was funny, quirky, that typical spoiled socialite, so you kind of know what you're getting into with her. And I don't think she was a bad person, I just think she was an irresponsible person. However, what really took away from this book and what made me hate it is the male love interest, or the main character, Brandon, I think it's Brendan. He had this like alpha male energy that I just could not stand. I don't like that in a male lead. Absolutely hated him. I thought he was pushy, possessive, ugh, just gross. I hated him. The spicy scenes were very cringy. The language used, it was hard to get through, honestly. If you just took out the male love interest and kept it to Piper and her sister Hannah discovering their roots and becoming better people, growing as people, this would have been a good book. I could have finished it. Again, really wouldn't recommend this one. So the next book I read in 2023 was a book club book, and that was After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So I am a big fan of her books. However, I think this was my least favorite of all of her books. This story follows Lauren and Ryan, who are a married couple who have been slowly falling out of love with each other. They decide that the only way for them to save their marriage is by taking a year apart with absolutely no contact. So yeah, I don't know a lot about marriage, obviously. I'm not married, but that doesn't seem like a healthy solution. That's their own decision. I really did like seeing Lauren's journey to self-discovery. She has never been away from this person, so she's kind of learning how to be on her own and discover who she is as a person. I think Lauren's sister Rachel was the most relatable character because she didn't really care if she ever got married. She was just kind of focusing on herself, and her goals in life were a lot different than her sister's, and I think Lauren got a new point of view on that. Not that there's anything wrong with either of those decisions. I wasn't sure if I liked the ending though. I don't want to spoil it whether or not things work out with them. All I really took from this book was that marriage sounded awful and I never wanted to get married. Overall, I would rate After I Do 3 stars, and it is my least favorite TJR book. The next book I read was My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and this was such a unique book and I ended up loving it. So this book is about a woman's desire to sleep for an entire year because she's super depressed, and she's hoping that maybe if she just sleeps through a year, she'll wake up and become a better person. Although her life is pretty close to perfect, the main character is clinically depressed, nihilistic, and she's pretty much an asshole. I really liked this book because the author was able to capture like an uglier side of depression instead of romanticizing it like so much of like media does. The main character, who is nameless, is pretty much just a rude person, and she's really unlikable, which I enjoyed about the character because sometimes you get sick of the totally perfect characters. She was lazy, grubby, she was a terrible friend, which is what true depression can do to you. It can make you a really shitty person, and I think a lot of that gets glossed over in the media, and you just end up making a character that's just kind of like sad, but she's still a good person. But sometimes depression can make you a really bad person. It's one of those books where like not a whole lot happens until like maybe the end, but it's still really engaging, and I would recommend this book if you're looking for something totally different than what you're used to. So overall, I gave this 4.5 stars. This next book was like the book for me. I can't stop talking about it or thinking about it. This is Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. Now, this is a TikTok favorite, so I was a little hesitant to pick it up. It's a young adult romance, but I just loved it. The main character, Liz Buxbaum, has always been a hopeless romantic. Ever since she was a little girl watching rom-coms with her mother, she's always dreamed of that fairy tale romance, specifically with her childhood crush Michael. When Michael moves back to town, she must rely on her nemesis and next-door neighbor, Wes, to get Michael to notice her. This book was the book of the year for me. It was really, really cute, and it made me enjoy YA romances again. There's definitely some corny and cliche moments, but that's to be expected, and it was just adorable anyway, so I don't even care. Seeing Liz and Wes's friendship grow was the best part of the book for me. And as a rom-com lover, I loved all the references. I do think there were times where Liz could be a little bit not like other girls, but I think that's just because the author, the way that she writes sometimes. But she did grow on me, so I really liked Liz and Wes as characters, and I really liked them together as people. Overall, 5 stars because I'm still talking about it almost a year later. Getting into the next book, another book that I think is a little overhyped on TikTok is The Perfect Marriage by Geneva Rose. So basically the plot is a successful lawyer's husband is arrested for the murder of his mistress. Now she must defend him, not fully convinced that he is innocent. So this was our next book in our book club, and I didn't have a problem getting through the book. I was really interested in finding out who the murderer was, but that's pretty much where the positives end. I can look past the whole like wife defending her husband in a case, because that's probably not going to happen in real life. That's not the major issue I had with the book. The dialogue is stilted and it's awful. The author does more work of telling and not showing the characters' feelings and intentions. The plot twist didn't really make much sense. There's a lot of plot holes. It's the dialogue that really kills it, honestly, because it could be an interesting concept of a book, but the dialogue, it's terrible. I'm sorry. So, 2.5 stars on The Perfect Marriage. If you're really bored and you have nothing else to read, fine. Or if it's free, I don't know. But I would never read it again. This was the lowest rated book of the year for me. So because I had loved Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter so much, and it was my first Lynn Painter book, I decided to pick up The Do-Over, another young adult romance by this author. So the main character, Emily Hornsby, has the worst Valentine's Day of all Valentine's Days. Her boyfriend cheats on her, she gets a speeding ticket, and she's forced to deal with the annoying Nick Stark. All she wants to do is go to sleep and forget that the day ever happened, but then when she wakes up the next day, it's February 14th again. So Emily is stuck in a time loop, and she must figure out how to get out of it and get to February 15th. This was another knockout by Lynn Painter. I loved this book so much. I wish I had savored it and read it slower so I could have really just stayed with the characters as long as possible. This is one of those Groundhog's Day stories, which are not my favorite type of story because they can get really repetitive and kind of boring. I did not feel that way during this book. It's pretty short, I think, so that it doesn't get too repetitive. The chemistry between Emily and Nick made it really worth it. This was a fun, lighthearted read, and I really wish I could read it again for the first time. So this was my second 5-star read of the year, The Do-Over by Lynn Painter. The only Taylor Jenkins read book I hadn't read by this point was Forever Interrupted. So Forever Interrupted is about Elsie and Ben and their whirlwind of a relationship, and this isn't a spoiler because it's literally on the back of the book, so just so you know. Shortly after getting married, Ben dies in an accident, and it leaves Elsie to grieve her short-lived romance. Ben's death also introduces Elsie to his mother, who had no idea that her son had been engaged or married. Forever Interrupted follows Elsie and her mother-in-law Susan as they work through their grief and try to move on without Ben. Overall, I really like this book much better than After I Do. I think the author tackled grief really well. I really enjoyed Elsie and Susan getting to know each other and building their relationship, despite their differences and despite their dislike of each other at first. I gave Forever Interrupted 4 stars. Alright, so once I had discovered Lynn Painter as an author, I needed to dive into her whole history of books. So this book had just come out, I believe, that month. So The Love Wager came out in March of 2023, right as I was discovering all the rest of Lynn Painter's books. So this is an adult romance, so it's a lot different than her 2 YA romance books that I had read in the beginning of the year. So this follows the character of Hallie, who is a messy 20-something who has hit rock bottom and she needs to turn it all around. After getting a new apartment, haircut, and a wardrobe, she decides it's time to find true love as well. While scrolling on a dating app, she comes across the profile of Jack, who is the guy that she had hooked up with the week before and ran out on. They connect as friends and they make a bet to see who can find true love first on the dating app. So this was the first adult novel by Lynn Painter that I had read, and I did like it. I did not realize that this was a spin-off of her other adult romance book, Mr. Wrong Number. So I did read it kind of out of order, but I don't think that really matters because the connections between the characters are very limited between both books. I think Hallie is a good main character, but again, she suffers from that I'm not like other girls syndrome, where she's the kind of girl that she's gonna drink beers with the guys and like hang out and stuff, and like that's fine. It's just the way that they get written that it feels like a little bit misogynistic to me. But I didn't hate her, so it didn't ruin the story. I think Hallie and Jack's friendship was really well developed, but their backstories weren't. It felt like there was a lot of details missing in the book that I would have liked to know more about, and it would have given a lot more depth to each character. So I do like Lynn Painter's YA books more than her adult books, but I will still give The Love Wager a 4. Bonk. So this next book was a bit of a niche read for me, and it is Final Fantasy VII Remake, Traces of Two Pasts, and this follows the backstories of 2 of the popular characters, Aerith and Tifa. I think if you're a fan of Final Fantasy VII Remake, then you're going to enjoy this book. The book is split into the backstory of Tifa and Aerith, and both backstories predate the video game. As a fan of each character, I really enjoyed getting more content about them. I would have liked each section to be longer and more detailed though. I really did enjoy Tifa's section more than Aerith's section. I feel like Tifa's gave us more insight into her backstory and into her childhood versus Aerith's was kind of a retelling. I gave this book 3.5 stars because I'm a little biased and I really like Final Fantasy VII. And I love these characters, so I'd pretty much read anything about them. So the next few books I read in 2023 was a series, and that is the Good Girls Guide to Murder series by Holly Jackson. This was a random pickup at the thrift store. I picked up the first book because the cover looked interesting. I had at least heard a little bit about it, and I'm glad I picked it up. So 5 years prior to the start of the story, student Andy Bell was murdered by her boyfriend Sal Singh, or at least that's what the town believes happened. But Pip isn't so sure. So she decides to cover the case for her senior project, and she uncovers a lot of secrets that somebody wanted to stay hidden. So then the series continues to follow Pip as she unravels this case and others after it. So there's 3 books in the series, but we're gonna really talk about mostly the first book because I don't want to spoil what happens after it, whether or not she figures things out, whatever. I think Pip and Robbie, who is Sal's brother actually, really make this series. When I was reading the first book, I never really knew who the true killer was going to be. Although I wasn't really happy with the final reveal, I still really enjoyed the first book and ended up giving it 4 stars. Moving to the second book, I wasn't sure where the series was going to go after the first book ended. And I do think Good Girl, Bad Blood is the weaker of the 3. So in this one, Pip needs to help her friend find his brother who has gone missing. So the big reveal in this book really came out of nowhere, and I felt like it just didn't really make a lot of sense. And along with that, there wasn't enough Pip and Robbie interaction. So that's why I feel like this book was more of a 3.5 star read for me. And then the third book in the series is called As Good as Dead. There was a big shift in the tone of the series by the third book, which I really liked. It got really dark and I loved it. So by the third book, Pip has been going through it. She has gone through a lot, and I'm not going to spoil what happens, but I think the series ends on like a crazy note. I did up this back to 4 stars from the second book. I felt like Pip was a little out of character by the third book, but she was dealing with a lot of trauma, a lot of PTSD. I would give the first and the third book 4 stars versus Good Girl, Bad Blood. I gave 3.5 stars, but I do really recommend this series. So this is a young adult mystery slash thriller, but I feel like by the third book, it's a little bit older than young adult, but it really depends on what your interests are and if you want your children to read it or not. So check it out first, I guess, to make your own decisions. So moving into my next book was another thrift store find, and that is called These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. So honestly, this was a judge a book by its cover moment. I just thought the cover was really pretty and it was in really great condition, so I picked it up. I also did read the back of the book and it sounded pretty interesting, so I will summarize it to you. So this retelling of Romeo and Juliet follows Roma and Juliet, former star-crossed lovers turned enemies, as their rival gangs fight to occupy Shanghai. But when members of each gang start turning up dead, Roma and Juliet must work together to discover what's killing the citizens of Shanghai before the city is completely wiped out. I thought this book was beautifully written. It's so descriptive and different than anything I had ever read before. So again, the imagery was descriptive and almost enchanting, which I think is really what the author's strengths are. I don't normally read fantasy books, but this one stood out to me a lot. The book was a bit longer for me and took me a little bit longer to read. It was still a really good book. I'm not sure I connected with it enough on the first read, but I still want to read the sequel, which is These Violent Ends, I believe it's called. But overall, I gave These Violent Delights 3.5 stars. I would like to try another read in the future at some point, but I thought this was really good, really well written. Moving on to one that maybe isn't so good in comparison, but I didn't hate it. And that is Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I just came off of reading a couple of really dark books and I needed like a palate cleanser. I need something really simple, straight to the point. And this book was hyped up on TikTok at the time, and I think it still is. And I usually steer clear of those books, but I felt like giving it a chance because I think it was on sale. I don't know. This is not a young adult book, so if you think it is because of the cartoon people, it's not. Icebreaker's main character is Anastasia, and she is a competitive figure skater whose dream is to compete in the Olympics. So Anastasia finds herself forced to share her rink with the hockey team, and they've had problems with the ice skating team in the past, so there's kind of a rivalry there. Anastasia forms an unlikely partnership with the captain of the hockey team, Nate Hawkins, in order for her to be able to train for nationals. So Icebreaker is a very polarizing book. Some people really, really love it and some people really hate it. I'm kind of in the middle. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I probably wouldn't read it again, but I'm not gonna sit here and say that I didn't enjoy reading it. I think that Stassi and Nate have a really healthy form of communication, which is kind of crazy for teenagers or college students. And I think the book shares a lot of positive points about mental health and therapy, so I will give it that. However, there was not enough time spent on the whole plot of the book about training for nationals and then Anastasia and Nate having to work together. There was too much time spent on like random parties and fights and stuff that I just felt like they were just there as like filler content. There were some points where the story really dragged on and didn't really go anywhere. But it was a really, really easy read and definitely different from the darker toned books that I had been reading. I really, really hated the epilogue, and I can't spoil it. Yeah, I hated the epilogue. So that's what really took this down even further for me. But overall, I gave Icebreaker 3 stars because it is definitely readable. It does what it needs to do, but there's a lot of problems with it. So take that as you will. All right, back on our Lynn Painter shit here. So after I read The Love Wager and realized it was a spin-off book, I had to go back and read Mr. Wrong Number, which was the first of her adult romance books, I think, or at least the first in that series. So this book is about Olivia, who is a hot mess, kind of similar to Hallie, honestly. After burning down her apartment, she's forced to move in with her brother and his roommate slash best friend. And meanwhile, she gets an accidental text from somebody that ends up turning into this like messaging meet cute situation. And Olivia is torn between the tension she feels with Colin, her brother's roommate, and this secret texter. Unfortunately, I think this book is the weakest of Lynn Painter's books. I really didn't fall in love with the characters, and I felt like they had really terrible communication for being adults. I felt like it just dragged out, and eventually I just didn't even care if Olivia and Colin got together or not. This was more of a forgettable book for me, so I gave this one 3 stars. I'm not saying it's awful, but it just wasn't my favorite. So the next book that I read last year was For Those Who Are Lost. And I'm just gonna read the summary straight up off the page here because I feel like I'm gonna mess it up. There's a lot of details in just the summary that kind of got confusing. Don't let that deter you from reading it. On the island of Guernsey, as World War II looms, many islanders make the heartbreaking choice to ship their children to safety in England, not knowing when or if they will be reunited. Acting on faith, Ava and Joseph Simon reluctantly send their children with their teacher. However, their teacher's sister Lily is fleeing her own situation at home and decides to switch places with her sister. It is Lily who takes the children to England, and it is Lily who lets Henry get on a train by himself. But Lily has always wanted a child, and she's unable to let Catherine go. So she decides to walk the other way, taking Catherine with her in her arms. That split-second decision impacts the lives of everyone long after the war ends. That is a lot in just the summary. The plot of the book was really appealing, and I think it was interesting and kept me engaged, but it felt like every important event throughout the war in the book was just rushed through just for the sake of getting through the book. We didn't get a lot of details on like the important parts that happened. In the end, it felt like nothing important had happened and there was no actual consequences for anything, like nothing bad happened, and it's like it's a World War II book and like nothing bad really happened. I really liked the ending, but most of the book felt inconsequential and a bit boring for what the setting is. So for those who are lost, got a 3-star rating for me. So the next book I read was Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, which I don't have in my hands right now because it's on loan. So this coming of age story is centered around Sally, whose sister dies in a tragic car accident when she is a senior in high school. So it follows Sally throughout her life leading up to the accident and the aftermath and how it affects the people around her and herself. So I randomly picked up this book at Barnes & Noble because I needed a second book for the buy one get one sale, and you can't just get one book, you have to get the half off other books. So I picked that one up because it sounded really interesting. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did. I just felt like I couldn't put this book down, and I read it within like a few days. I felt like the book was written in a very unique way through the eyes of Sally. You know that her sister is gonna die before you read the book, but it's still just as devastating to read that part of the book and afterward. I really recommend this book if you're okay with reading tragedies and that won't bother you so much, because it's a really good coming of age novel, I think. Did I love the ending? Maybe not. I could have done without that, so that kind of took the star rating down a little bit to 4 stars though. So Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, I do really recommend it, and I gave it a 4 stars. The next book was one of my book club books, and that is 1,000 Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. So 1,000 Boy Kisses is about Poppy and Rune, who form an unbreakable bond as kids, discovering their love as they grow into their teen years. When Rune is forced to move back to Norway, Poppy promises to keep their love together, until one day she just cuts him off with no explanation. Rune returns a few years later a completely different person, somebody who is angry and has become closed off due to being forced to move back home and losing Poppy. He eventually discovers why Poppy ghosted him and promises to help her fill her kisses jar. And I won't reveal the spoilers of why she ghosted him and the rest of the book, but basically her grandmother gives her this jar filled with 1,000 blank paper hearts, and she wants her to fill it with 1,000 kisses from a boy or boys or her love, whatever. So she's really encouraging her granddaughter to go out there and be smooching all around. But it ends up just being her and Rune sharing those kisses, so it's fine. The story is really cute, but it's really sad at the same time. It can be a bit corny at times, but it is a YA book, so you have to expect that. And I think Rune could be such a cliche. He was just that moody art boy, angry with his father kind of thing. It didn't take away from the romance between him and Poppy though, and I really enjoyed their connection and Poppy trying to get Rune to rediscover who he really is. I do think that the characters were really codependent on each other, especially before he moved back to Norway. Just saying. Overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I definitely shed a tear or two, so I will give this one 3 stars. So the only classic novel I read in 2023 was Northanger Abbey by the great Jane Austen. This novel is supposed to be gothic satire, but I don't really think it did much for me compared to the other Jane Austen books I have read in the past. Catherine is the main character in this book, and she is obsessed with gothic thrillers, so much so that when she arrives to Northanger Abbey, she suspects that the castle is filled with dark mysteries and secrets. So I really liked the main character, but it felt like not a whole lot happened, which is probably the point of the book. I get it, I understand, but it was just a little boring to me compared to like Pride and Prejudice and Emma and stuff that I've read before. The second half of the book was just not very interesting to me, and that's when she actually arrives at Northanger Abbey. It took like half a book for her to get there. Maybe I just didn't click with it. Other people might. It's just not my favorite by this author, so I gave it 3 stars. So the next set of books I read was what I consider to be a great summer read for me. I was just posted up on the beach on vacation and I was flying through these books. However, I feel like the series declined from the first book down to the third book. And that is The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han. So Belly has spent every summer at the beach house. In fact, her entire life has been measured in summers. The rest of the year just simply does not count to her. Each year, her family meets up with her mom's best friend and sons to spend the summer together. But this summer is different. Belly wants to have the best summer yet, but is faced with unexpected tragedy and unrequited crushes that change everything. Bum, bum, bum. I was in love with the first book. It was just the perfect summer vibes, and it made me wish I had a summer house growing up, but I did not. I think Belly can be immature at times, but she is very young. She's like 16, 15 maybe? So that's inevitable. I haven't watched the show yet, but I do want to. From the very first book, I was Team Jeremiah. I just didn't feel any chemistry between Belly and Conrad. As the series goes on, I find myself more annoyed with how everything played out, especially by the third book. I felt like what could have been a series following different summers in Belly's life, they kind of just rushed through the one real summer we get at the beach house. I understand that they're dealing with like different changes and tragedy, but I felt like the rest of the books didn't capture that summer magic that the first book does. So I picked up the series because I really liked To All the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han. I feel like this series suffers the exact same way that that series does, is that by the third book, it just falls flat. I think this author was totally biased towards Conrad because of the way she completely changed Jeremiah's personality by the third book. She just wanted Conrad to seem like the better choice no matter what, and I don't think he was. Whether or not she ended up with Jeremiah or Conrad, I was just not Team Conrad, ever. I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but I will tell you in order. I rated The Summer I Turned Pretty, which is the first book in the series, 4 stars. Coming to It's Not Summer Without You, 3.5 stars. Down to We'll Always Have Summer, 3 stars. So with this next book, I was still trying to capture the summer vibes because it was August and I wasn't ready to let go of summer just yet. So this next book is Every Summer After. I just happened to come across this in Barnes & Noble and I thought it seemed interesting. So this book is about Percy, who spent 6 summers at her family's lake house, becoming inseparable with her next door neighbor, Sam, until it all falls apart, obviously. So now years later, Percy must return back to the lake house and face Sam after everything that has happened. So this story is told in flashbacks and present day, from the day that Percy and Sam meet to when they reunite. So Percy is definitely the asshole in this situation in the book. Overall, I don't think this was a very memorable read. I liked the story and I liked how it was told between the past and the present, but overall I just don't think I connected with it so much. I think the major conflict in this book was forced and kind of predictable. I think that Percy's actions were extremely unjustified and I really wasn't happy with the resolution at the end. I loved the setting and the lazy summer vibes on the lake. I'm not saying that I didn't like this book. I would read it again and give it another chance. So I gave this one 3.5 stars at the time because I did enjoy reading it. I just felt like it didn't leave a lasting impression, but I think it's still good. So the next book that I read was The Final Girl Support Group. So the final girl refers to the character in a horror movie that is the last girl left alive. So think of characters like Laurie Strode from Halloween, Sidney Prescott from Scream, or Nancy Thompson from Nightmare on Elm Street. So this is kind of a take on those characters, but with completely new characters, but they're based on those movies. So main character Lynette Tarkington is a real-life final girl, along with 5 other women that have been meeting in this support group for years. So one by one, these final girls are being targeted and killed, and it's up to the rest of them to find the killer and try to stay alive. So as a fan of the horror movies that are referenced in this book, this was really fun for me. Each character is written in depth and they all have their own personality and backstory, which makes the book much more compelling. Pacing was a bit slow at first, but once the action started, the book just like flew by for me. There were so many twists and turns that I really didn't know who the killer was. So I really enjoyed this book considering I haven't read much horror in my life. So I ended up giving The Final Girl Support Group 4.5 stars. So I really recommend this book, especially around Halloween time. So this next book I think is so overhyped. Maybe it's just me, but I think The Silent Patient was just fine. I don't think it's as great as everyone seems to think it is, but again, my own personal opinions. So The Silent Patient follows the story of a famous painter who seems to have it all until one day she unexpectedly kills her husband. So her refusal to speak after the crime places her in a mental health facility for the rest of her life. Years later, a psychotherapist is determined to get her to speak and reveal the truth of why she snapped and killed her husband. I thought the book started off slow. I think Alicia, who is the silent patient, is interesting to read about, but the main character, aka the narrator, is so boring, which made it really difficult for me to get through it. But I think learning about Alicia and her backstory are the highlights of this book. So I did not see the twist coming, which was nice for me considering I feel like a lot of thrillers are really predictable and you can kind of pinpoint what's going to happen, and a lot of authors like to plant too many clues in the beginning of the book so that you can kind of see it coming. However, I don't think I would read this book again. I didn't hate it, so I would rate this one 3 stars. So the next book comes from a series that my friend gifted me for my birthday, and it's the Disney Twist series. So this one is A Whole New World, and it's kind of like a what-if take on Aladdin, the movie. So in this case, it's what if Aladdin never found the lamp and Jafar got it instead. I really love Aladdin. That's one of my favorite Disney movies, and I liked having a twist on the original story. However, a lot of the early scenes in this book were kind of just a retelling of the movie, and it wasn't until the twist that things started to change and become more interesting. I think at the time I was in kind of a reading slump, so it took me longer to finish this book than it really should have. It's not a bad book, and I think that Jasmine is a really well-rounded character in this book. Overall though, I would give this one 3 stars. I think it's a really good read for Disney fans, and I'm excited to read the other 2 books, which are different twists on Disney movies. But if you really like Aladdin or you really like Disney, I do recommend the series. These ones are by Liz Braswell. I think if I had read this at a different time, I would have enjoyed it more, but again, I was in a reading slump, so I'll give it the benefit of the doubt on that. So the next one is called The Counselors. Camp Alpine Lake has become a second home for local girl Goldie, and she can't wait to return, especially after the terrible year that she's had. However, tragedy strikes at the beginning of the summer when the body of a local teen shows up at the camp. So Goldie must figure out what happened, all while keeping her own secret safe. So this was a random purchase at Barnes & Noble. I was grabbing coffee from Starbucks, and they like to do the $5 books with the purchase of like a drink or something. So me and my friends, we all grabbed it that day. We're like, why not? It sounds interesting. I was expecting this to be a slasher, kind of like Friday the 13th vibes, because like there's a murder and it's at a camp, but it was actually more of a mystery. I still really enjoyed the book. I liked the main character. This was a very fast-paced young adult thriller. What set this apart for me was it does touch upon class differences for Goldie, who is the poor local girl, versus her friends that attend the camp are upper class and they don't have the same kind of struggles that she does. I do recommend this one if you like small town mysteries or even like the summer camp vibes. So overall, I really enjoyed The Counselors, and I gave it 4 stars. Continuing on the mystery trend at this time, I picked up 5 Survive by Holly Jackson, who is the author of the Good Girls Guide to Murder series, so that's why I wanted to check this one out. So Red and her friends are on a road trip for spring break, but they find themselves broken down on the road with no way of finding help. The situation becomes worse when they realize that there is a killer waiting outside for them, and this killer will not stop until he gets the secret that he is after. So this YA thriller had me hooked, and I kept guessing on who the killer was and who had the big secret. I liked how well written that the main character was. She deals with OCDs and anxiety, and I think her inner dialogue was well written. However, I felt like the ending was way too contrived, especially with the characters literally walking the reader through the truth and the reveal. I could have put the puzzle pieces together myself, and I feel like the author didn't expect the readers to do that and just pretty much had the characters tell you word for word what, who, what, where, and why, and it just was a little annoying to me. So that knocked it down a bit for me, but I would still give 5 Survive 4 stars. So switching into more of a rom-com type of book, I decided to read See You Yesterday. So this book follows college student Barrett Bloom, who is excited to start this new chapter in her life, but her first day at college is a complete mess. After embarrassing herself in class, bombing her interview, and setting a frat on fire, she's looking forward to just starting a new day. But she wakes up and it's September 21st again. Barrett also discovers that her rude physics classmate has been stuck in a time loop as well, and they must work together to fix it. So this was a really fun read. Some of the physics stuff was a little bit lost on me. I never took physics, wasn't a big science girly, but it didn't take away from the book and enjoying the story. I think Barrett and Miles form a really nice bond and a relationship. Groundhog plots where they keep repeating the same day are never my favorite, but I liked how this book didn't feel too repetitive. I just wish we had different scenes than what we got sometimes. I think Barrett was a really good main character with realistic flaws and insecurities, and her and Miles really brought out the best in each other. So I ended up giving See You Yesterday 4 stars. So this next book was a bit different than anything that I had read in 2023. If you're familiar with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then you know of the character Bucky Barnes, who is a US soldier and best friends with Captain America. And this story follows his backstory before he is kidnapped and turned into the Winter Soldier. This story follows the early years of Bucky and how he became the Winter Soldier, but it is a different version of events from the MCU in which Bucky didn't live in Brooklyn and he doesn't meet Steve Rogers until way later on in life. So I am a fan of the other books by this author, Mackenzie Lee, Gamora, Nebula, and then Loki. So I was eager to read this one, and I am a big fan of Bucky as well. So this was a little bit slow at times, but the second half really picked up for me and felt more Marvel. I expected this to follow the MCU, but it was an alternate origin story, which was fine. It introduced some new characters to us, but I just didn't really connect to some of those characters. I think the ending was well written, devastating. I'm not sure if this was my favorite by this author, but I still really liked it. I love Marvel. I love Bucky. Like, I was going to read it no matter what, and I do recommend it if you are a Marvel fan. So I gave this one 3.5 stars. So one of the last books I read in 2023 was Love in the Time of Serial Killers. This book is about Phoebe, who is a PhD candidate and is obsessed with true crime, so much so that she is even doing her dissertation on it. So she has to come back to her childhood home, but she becomes suspicious of her neighbor Sam and convinced that he may be a serial killer. Or something even scarier, a really nice guy who can get through Phoebe's armor. That's part of the description. I didn't come up with that, okay? So the cover really got me. I thought it was a really cute cover, and I expected something different from the book. I think it had its ups and downs. I really loved some of the side characters like Connor and Shawnee, but the main character could get a bit annoying at times, and I think that's just because she reminded me of me in middle school, kind of like that I'm trying to be cool and like closed off and stuff, so that was kind of annoying for me, and just a wake-up call. There really wasn't much of a plot, which I don't think was the problem. I just wish there was more time spent on Phoebe thinking Sam was a serial killer, or maybe they both thought their neighbor was one and they had to work together. Something that just tied into this title a little bit more. It was just more of her mental issues and why she connected with true crime and stuff, which, I don't know, kind of felt trivializing true crime. There were some good parts, some bad parts. This was more of a mid-read for me, so I gave this one 3 stars. Now for the last book of 2023, we had to end it with one of my favorite authors of the year, which was Lynn Painter's new book, Betting on You. So on a flight back home to Omaha, Bailey meets the cynical and obnoxious Charlie. They spend the plane ride arguing over whether or not girls and guys can be friends. Very similar to When Harry Met Sally, if you're familiar with that movie. A few years later, they end up working together at a local theme park where they start betting on their coworkers' romances and whether or not guys and girls can truly be friends. So there's a lot going on in this book, from betting to fake dating to friendships to lovers, that you can get whiplash like just trying to read the summary, so I tried to simplify it a bit. It's still a really cute book though. I love Lynn Painter's other YA romances, and this is another one. So this was a must read for me no matter what. Charlie and Bailey have a lot of fun banter and really cute moments. A little corny at times, but still really adorable. I do think that there was too many different romance tropes thrown in there, and I never really thought this was possible, but there is such a thing as too many Taylor Swift references, and I am a Swiftie. I love Taylor Swift, but there's just too many in this book to where you just start to roll your eyes like, another reference? Like, come on. I loved this book. I had such a fun time reading it, and I did recommend it to multiple friends. So aside from those little issues that I had, still really loved Betting on You. This could have been a 5-star if it focused in on like one romance trope instead of like trying to throw as many in there as possible, and cut down on the Swiftie references. However, I still gave it 4.5 stars, and it was a really great way to end 2023. So that's it. That is the reading wrap up for 2023. Hopefully this gave you guys some ideas of what you might want to read in 2024. If there is anything that you really liked or you're looking forward to reading, just drop a comment, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video.